Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Reuven speaking to you from south of Jerusalem, here in the Holy Land of Israel. Today is the 14th day of the month of Sivan, the third month of the Hebrew calendar. The year is 5785. It's June 10th, 2025. And this coming Shabbat, we will be reading the third Parashat, the third Torah reading of the book of Numbers, Beha'alotcha. When you kindle the lamp, the Menorah, which begins in the book of Numbers, chapter 8, verse 1, concludes chapter 12, verse 16, and we'll be talking about that in just a moment. Sunday, 2 days ago, was the final day of the 6 days of Yemei Tashlumim, the 6 days of I always forget the English translation, but basically the 6 additional days of the holiday of Shavuot, which of course is a one-day holiday, but 6 additional days that pilgrims could bring their holiday offerings, including but not only the bikurim, the first fruits, because the first fruits they could bring all throughout the summer, and even into the fall, because not every fruit was ripe and ready to be presented as an offering at this time. So in any case, those 6 days concluded on Sunday, and the adjustment in our daily tefillah, daily prayer here also concluded on Sunday. We are saying Tachanun again in the morning and afternoon tefillah, morning and afternoon prayer, which is a supplication for Hashem's Rahmanut, for His compassion, something that we don't say on holidays, not because we don't want Hashem's compassion, but because it's sort of included in the whole package, let's say, of the holiday. So whenever there's a holiday, we don't say that. But as I said, we're back to saying it again. And on the national level, things seem to be as up in the air as ever. Yes, the army is making tremendous progress in Gaza. It seems that the strategy of Hamas is basically to never lay down their arms, never give up the hostages, which is, of course, compelling Israel to continue to fight and killing tens and tens of terrorists and destroying tens and tens of tunnels of so many of the buildings in Gaza that are still standing, and even ones that are half ruined, are booby-trapped. The Hamas, as they retreated, would fill the buildings with explosives. And we've already lost, unfortunately, a number of soldiers due to this. So the war in Gaza goes on. When will it end? I don't know. Israel now is, with the cooperation of an American firm, distributing the humanitarian aid, and by doing so, they are doing it without Hamas. For the most part, I hear there sometimes they do steal it, but Hamas, prior to this, all the humanitarian aid that went into Gaza via the UN, which quite clearly is in cahoots with Hamas, they're partners, it would all get hijacked by Hamas. They would stockpile it, hoard it, and sell it to hungry Gazans at exorbitant prices. This is how they continue to pay their terrorists and to continue to purchase weapons that they could possibly purchase. And now that's being avoided by and large. So they are starting to hurt. And in fact, they are killing and torturing Gazans who are going for this aid, because it means that they're losing control. And also Gazans have broken into UN warehouses where Hamas had hoarded tons and tons and tons of flour and other basic food items. In the meantime, a small militia in Gaza, apparently with the help or with the cooperation, or at least turning a blind eye to, of Israel, it's unclear, has is stood up in opposition to Hamas, and there have been some clashes between them. And so, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Well, it's a good thing that they're fighting amongst themselves, I guess. It's a good thing that there are Gazans who are against Hamas and have now the ability, apparently, to fight Hamas. This new militia, which is, I think, clan-based, but it's also ideologically based, is no, it's no fairy tale for us. They're also very jihadistic, I believe. So these things can sometimes be a good help at the start and sometimes get out of hand. We've had that experience before in Israel, and I know elsewhere as well, where you support one militia in order to fight the other militia, and then that one you support it becomes your main enemy. So we'll have to see how that develops. In the meantime, just this past day, the Israeli Navy bombed ports in Yemen because the Houthis from Yemen are still sending missiles over to Israel. And in really major news, things seem to be really heating up with Iran and the world. Iran is making tremendous progress toward acquiring nuclear weapons. The United States still insists on diplomatic talks, which, as we know, Iran has always used them to their advantage. They gives them time to push forward in their efforts to develop nuclear weapons. They claim now that they were able to steal from Israel information about Israel's nuclear facility, and that they will expose that to the world if the European Union decides, and they're going to be deciding today or tomorrow, I think, on whether or not Iran's in violation of their former agreements. And if they decide that they are, then all these sanctions will snap back in place. And Iran is threatening militarily with missiles. I believe even Europe, and certainly Israel and the United States are threatening everybody. They threaten that they're going to just go crazy and bomb everybody and bomb Israel's nuclear facility, etc., etc. And in the meantime, there's a political crisis here in Israel, a really avoidable crisis, I believe. The ultra-Orthodox political parties, which are in the government coalition, are threatening to leave the government, which would cause the government to collapse and early elections, over their refusal to apparently any compromise proposal for yeshiva students for ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students to be drafted into the army. And this is a huge issue in Israel. It's been for decades. And of course, this past 2 years, it's become a really crucial issue because tens of thousands of young people could be in the army and sharing the burden of this war with their fellow Israelis. But because of long-standing agreements, they're not. And many people in this country feel that has to change. It just can't go on anymore. It's completely unfair. And I have to believe that many ultra-Orthodox citizens also understand that and feel the same way. And of course, there are ultra-Orthodox young men who are voluntarily joining the army. And that's a very, very good thing. And especially when we read these Parashat that we've been reading over the past few weeks. I mean, an army was the army of Israel. The first army of Israel was commanded by God. We read that in the first chapters of the book of Numbers. And we're still discussing it in this week's Parsha. An army is commanded by God. And in fact, tradition has it that the tribe of Yisachar was a tribe of Torah scholars, and they would study. And their brother tribes, Zvulun, would support them so that they could study full time. So they had this arrangement between these two tribes. They were sort of, twins in a way, metaphorically speaking. But also Zvulun and also, of course, Yisachar all served in the army. There was no such thing as a pass from the army simply because you were studying Torah. Those who did not serve in the army were the Levites, but not because they were Torah scholars, but because they were in charge of guarding over and tending to and protecting the tabernacle, which is a quite different responsibility. So yes, it would seem that being a participant, being a soldier in the army of Israel would be a top Torah commandment, a top mitzvah that you could very easily fulfill by taking a couple of years out of your life. What happened now is that because of Israel has only, even if all these young yeshiva or ultra-Orthodox, I say ultra-Orthodox this time because there are many Orthodox Jews who do serve in the army. Of course, the national religious community are highly represented in the army, and in fact, in terms of casualties in this war, they have a very high percentage because they are in the top combat units. So when I stress ultra-Orthodox because it's a different community with different rabbis, and they're not serving, but with this past year and 7 months or 8 months of war, many reserve soldiers have been, some have served even as many as 400 days over the past 18 months in the army, because we don't have enough soldiers to give them more rest. And of course that has horrible effects, very difficult on family life, very difficult on businesses, on employment, but we sort of have no choice. So yes, there is a tremendous need right now for as many soldiers to be part of the army as possible. And that's what this crisis is about. And the three ultra-Orthodox political parties, which are currently part of the coalition, are threatening this week to submit a bill to bring down the government, which would create horrible chaos here, especially in this time of heightened tension with Iran, and even the United States is pleading with these parties to reconsider. We'll see what happens. One thing they do know is that they're not going to get a better deal from any other government. Should the government fall in a few months' time, there's new elections, either more or less the same constellation of parties will form a right-wing government, as is the current government, or a left-wing government will form, and they will certainly not be offering the ultra-Orthodox a better deal than what they could get now. But nobody really wants to give them what they want for two reasons. One, because it's really impossible now in terms of what I've just been describing, and secondly, because politically you are going to create a lot of antagonism if you give them what they want. So it's a matter of sort of threading the needle with what you can give and what they will accept. We'll see what happens. I personally think that bringing the government down now would be a really bad move. Governments are never perfect. This government's not perfect. There are many things they are accomplishing, and a lot of things are really under the radar. And of course, we are fighting a war, and I do not see that fighting this war and these many battles is going to be conducted any better or much differently by any other constellation of political leaders. And of course, having an interim government, which is what happens when the Knesset decides for new elections, limits their ability to do many things and limits their ability to make many decisions, which of course limits Israel's ability to successfully wage the wars that we're waging. So enough of that, but that's what's in the news today, and it's interesting because when we do read this Parsha, Beha'alotcha, which is a fascinating Parsha, because it's sort of a continental divide in Israel's journey in the wilderness. And why do I say that? Because up till now, Israel received the Torah, they built the tabernacle, and beginning with the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, we see how they were organized into an army, into encampments, and everybody given a job. All the Levites, the different Levitical families, each given different jobs in the tabernacle, and of course transporting the tabernacle from one place to another. And in this week's Parsha, we learn about how they'll be moving forward, how the encampment will go from one campsite to the next according to Hashem's instructions. And everything just seems to be right in line for entering into the land. I mean, again, we're 1 year and a month approximately into the wilderness, and they're heading now for Canaan, for Canaan. And so ostensibly within a few months maximum, they could be on the border of Canaan, and then enter Canaan in order to conquer and take it as their inheritance. And we even get to the point, beautiful, one of the most beautiful, fascinating passages in the entire Torah, and it's sort of halfway through this Parashat Beha'alotcha, and it just pops out. It's a very final half of the first half of Beha'alotcha, where everything is just going great. We're moving forward, and here's how it goes. Let's just start a little bit before, a verse or two before the verses. You'll recognize them as soon as I read them. We're in chapter 10, verse 33. They journeyed from the mountain of Hashem, a 3-day distance, and the ark of the covenant of Hashem journeyed before them a 3-day distance to search out for them a resting place. The cloud of Hashem was over them by day, and they journeyed from the camp. When the ark would journey, Moshe said, "Arise, Hashem, and let your foes be scattered. Let those who hate you flee from before you." And when it rested, he would say, "Reside tranquilly, Hashem, among the myriad thousands of Israel." I'm just going to read those last two verses in Hebrew, which is just so beautiful. Hehi binaso Aharon, vayomer Moshe, Kuma Hashem v'yafutzu oyevecha v'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha. Uvenucho yomar shuva Hashem revavot alafei Yisrael. Beautiful two verses which just, I don't know, they lift me up. And it's interesting because we're told that the Aharon, which wasn't a huge piece of furniture, the Aharon, the Ark of the Covenant, was nevertheless rather heavy, made of wood and gold, and of course the Kruvim, the cherubim, were made of gold. So it was heavy. However, when the 4 Levites would carry it using the poles, that all these implements in the wilderness have, all the sacred vessels had poles for carrying. When they would carry them on their shoulders, it says, we're told that the Aharon itself, the ark itself, would lift them up. It carried them. It was so godly, it was so heavenly, it was so ethereal. So that's what they're describing right now. And again, you read those verses and you're just, okay, we're ready. We're going into Canaan. We're taking it. This is as good as it gets. And yes, it was as good as it gets, because immediately after, the next verse, which is the beginning of chapter 11, the people took to seeking complaints. And before I go on with that, I just want you to think about what I just said. The people took to seeking complaints. And that is basically an accurate translation of the Hebrew, which is Vayihi ha'am k'mitonanim ra ba'oznei Hashem. The people were as complainers, is another way of translating. But they had nothing to complain about, but they got bored. In fact, a few verses later, it says, we read, they say, that they're, I'm trying to say that they're V'ata nafshenu yivesha. They say, now our souls are dry, meaning we're bored. We're listless. And so they're coming up with things to complain about. They're acting like little children. And let's leave it off at that for the moment, because I want to start at the beginning of Beha'alotcha before we get to part 2. But that's sort of a teaser. It begins very beautifully. Going back to Numbers chapter 8, verse 1. וידבר השם אל משה לאמור דבר אל אהרון אמרת אליו בהעלותך את הנרות אל מול פני המנורה יאירו שבעת הנרות ויעש כן אהרון אל מול פני המנורה העלה נרותיה כאשר ציווה השם את משה. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to Aaron and say to him, When you kindle the lamps toward the face of the menorah, shall the 7 lamps be cast light. Aaron did so toward the face of the menorah. He kindled its lamps as Hashem had commanded Moshe. This is the workmanship of the menorah, hammered out gold from its base to its flower. It is hammered out according to the vision that Hashem showed Moshe. So did he make the menorah. This, of course, is referring back to what we read about in the book of Exodus, where they made all the vessels and the Mishkan and the tabernacle itself. And we're told that Moshe was kind of scratching his head. How do I make this menorah? It seems very complex, and in fact, it is physically, engineering-wise, to make something like this out of gold is a very difficult thing to do. And so Hashem showed him a vision of what Hashem had in mind, so that Moshe could use that as a template for the menorah. But the question is asked by our sages, of course, why? We've already read about this. Again, we're back to where we were many chapters ago, many books ago even. We're back to the inauguration, really, of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. And so Hashem spoke to Moshe, says, speak to Aharon. So again, we go back to last week's Parsha. Last week's Parsha concluded with the 12 days during which, on each of the 12 days, one of the leaders, one of the princes or presidents or heads of the 12 tribes, each brought gifts to the tabernacle. And of course, each brought the identical gifts. Not because they all were identical, but because their intention translated itself as identical gifts, meaning nobody was better than the other, and everybody's intentions were worthy of what they brought. And right after that, in the last verse of last week's Parsha, we read, Moshe arrived at the tent of meeting to speak with Hashem. He heard the voice speaking to him from atop the cover that was upon the ark of the testimony, from between the 2 cherubim, and he spoke to him again. We read a very similar line at the end of the book of Exodus, and a very similar line at the very beginning of the book of Leviticus. And here we're told that what did Hashem say to him? He said, Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you kindle the lamps, etc., etc. Why? Again, our sages ask why. And the answer that they give is that Aharon was a bit downcast, a bit despondent. He said, all the other leaders of the other tribes all got to honor Hashem by bringing gifts. But what about me? I'm the leader of my tribe, and I wasn't given an opportunity to bring gifts. And so Hashem said to Moshe, tell Aharon that he's going to light the candles, the lamps of the menorah, something which he and his children will do every day forever, as long as the temple is standing. And this is your contribution, this is your gift, and believe me, it's a gift above all other gifts. And so when we're told a few verses later that Aharon did so, Aharon did so, vayasachin Aharon. And again, our sages ask, why did, of course he did so. Why does it emphasize that he did so? Because they said that Aharon did as he's told. He didn't add, he didn't change. He didn't try to add extra flair to it. He did simply as he was told, following the halacha of how to light the lamps. And again, the description of lighting the lamps became the halacha, how the Kohanim would light the lamps of the menorah every day. Anyway, right after that, we read about the sanctification of the Levites, who are going to be serving in the tabernacle. Again, something which we've, I think, read about before, reading about it again. And then, right after that, we read about Pesach Sheni, which is something we discussed not long ago, because it was Pesach Sheni not long ago, second Passover. And again, this means it says, beginning of the chapter 9, Hashem spoke to Moshe in the wilderness in the second year from their exodus from the land of Egypt in the first month, right? It's time to observe Passover again. And so he says to Moshe, time for Passover. And then, of course, we read about the men who were tamei met, were impure due to contact with a corpse. And they come to Moshe and say, we're tamei, we don't have a chance to become untamei, to become pure again, so we can't make the offering, but we want to. It's not fair. So Moshe says, let me talk to Hashem. And Hashem basically honors these men by saying, yes, you'll have a second chance 1 month exactly, 30 days exactly after, or 1 month exactly after the first Passover. So on the 14th day of the month of Iyar is Pesach Sheni, second Passover. And we learn here, anyone who was on the way to the temple in Jerusalem, but got stuck in traffic, whatever, didn't make it on time, but they were on the way, they were within striking distance, let's say, they would have a second chance. And anybody who was tamei and needed to be purified would have a second chance. Anyone who failed to bring their Passover offering in the appointed time without a legitimate reason, a legitimate excuse, and only those excuses which I've just described now are legitimate, would be cut off from his people. And so anyway, yes, Passover, second Passover, Pesach Sheni, which of course, as we've discussed many times, is now also referred to as the holiday of second chances, because just as these people were given a second chance to fulfill Hashem's will, we also are given a second chance, and oftentimes more than a second chance, to straighten out and do God's will and change our ways. And this is a holiday which sort of commemorates that and sort of turns that idea into a law, into a reality. Okay, then following Pesach Sheni, we read about the establishment, the setting up of the tabernacle and the cloud of glory that rested over it, and then it starts to describe, the Parashat starts to describe how Israel would move through the wilderness according to Hashem's will. And Hashem, when the cloud of glory would lift up, that was a sign to the people that it was time to move on. And when they were traveling and it rested again, it was time to set up camp. And concerning that movement, we read here in chapter 10, verse 1, Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, make for yourself 2 silver trumpets, make them hammered out, and they shall be yours for the summoning of the assembly, and to cause the camps to journey. When they sound a long blast with them, the entire assembly shall assemble to you, to the entrance of the tent of meeting. If they sound a long blast with one, the leaders shall assemble to you, the heads of Israel's thousands. When you sound short blasts, truot. There are tikiot and truot, I might be mistaking. Now, short blast is a tru'ah. Tikiyah is a longer blast. When they sound 2 short blasts, the camps resting to the east shall journey. When you sound short blasts a second time, the camps resting to the south shall journey. Short blasts shall they sound for their journeys. When you gather together the congregation, you shall sound a long blast, but not a short blast. The sons of Aharon, the Kohanim, shall sound the trumpets, and it shall be for you an eternal decree for your generations. When you go to wage war in your land against an enemy who oppresses you, shall sound short blasts of the trumpets, and you shall be recalled before Hashem, your God, and you shall be saved from your foes. On days of gladness, and on your festivals, and on your new moons, you shall sound the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over your peace offerings, and they shall be remembrance for you before your God. I am Hashem, your God. Okay, trumpets, 2 silver trumpets. Very, very fascinating. First of all, we know trumpet was the very best. It was a sound system. It was the very best way to communicate with the entire encampment. And the Morse code, as it were, of these trumpets were either tkiot or truot, either long blasts or short blasts. And depending on the number of each, it was a different signal given out to the encampment. And as you know, the Temple Institute has created silver trumpets, which we actually do use. They're sounded on fast days or on gatherings when many people gather at the Western Wall in order to pray. When we have a difficult situation in a country and prayer is called for, special prayer, and those trumpets are sounded. And also, it turns out that there's actually halacha that trumpets in the land of Israel, when Israel has sovereignty in the land of Israel, and the majority of the nation of Israel is living in the land of Israel, that these trumpets should also be sounded each day, or on fast days, every fast day that's observed in Israel. And in fact, the Yeshivat Mikdash, the Mikdash Yeshiva of the Temple Institute does sound trumpets. I think even on every day for that Tachanun prayer, when I was, which I mentioned earlier, which is another interpretation of when these trumpets should be sounded. And of course, in the temple, as it mentions here, trumpet blasts were part of the offering, the daily offering, all the offerings. Without the trumpets, and without the song of the Levites, by the way, it was not an acceptable offering. This was part of the required ceremony for offerings. But I just want to mention that, as you know, the Temple Institute initiated a project soon after the war in Gaza began, and that was to create silver trumpets of a single piece of silver, not an easy task, and create sets of them and send out two trumpets to different units serving the army so that they could sound those trumpets before entering into combat. And we have succeeded in creating so far a limited number of sets, and you may have seen, we posted them, and you may have seen elsewhere also short video clips of soldiers sounding the trumpets. And again, it's when you go to wage war in your land against an enemy who oppresses you, you shall sound short blasts of the trumpet, and you shall be recalled before Hashem. Hashem it's calling out to Hashem, said Hashem should remember us and help us and fight for us and have compassion for us, and basically. And it says, and you shall be saved from your foes. So there are only a couple of mitzvot in the entire Torah where we're told what the reward is for performing those mitzvot. One is kibud avim, honoring our mother and father, which is length of days. Also shiluach haken, which is sending out a mother bird from her nest before taking the eggs. Arichut yamim, length of days. And this one. So, long story short, because I'm running out of time, we'll be posting a video in the upcoming days detailing this project of ours and all the halacha and all the history behind it. And I really hope that you'll watch and get something out of it. It's a very enjoyable, not short, but a very enjoyable video and very inspiring. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.